Hello everyone. It's nice to see our community growing. Well, my current work, sorry, just do I have 25 or 20 minutes?
If you want questions, then 20 minutes.
20 minutes, yeah, perfect. Can you give me a sign? Right, my talk, my current work, it's all work in progress, is based on my interest in cantometrics and in the relationship between singing style and the society. But the methodology I'm going to present addresses some general MIR issues, such as defining objective descriptors, getting the ground truth right, and closing the semantic gap, and all that concerning vocal timbre, which is particularly tricky because nobody actually really explicitly understands vocal timbre. And here I actually envision that we MIR folks could really contribute to voice science and to the general knowledge about singing voice. Well, I've talked a lot about cantometrics previously, so I'm not going into detail. Alan Lomax, in his cantometrics experiment, found, among other things, that in societies where narrow, squeezed, tense singing is the norm, the oppression of women is much more severe than in societies with open, wide, and relaxed singing. And it was all very controversial at his time, and it remains controversial. Many ethnomusicologists expressed their concerns. On the other hand, his statistics look sound to me, as far as I can judge, given the data that I can see. So nobody knows, was he right or not? To find out, I would like to use modern MIR technologies, as we all do, and for the one thing, I would like to reformulate his definition of what he calls vocal tension or vocal width in more objective and better measurable terms, and also make the annotation process scalable or ideally automatic if we can. Okay, I'll give you some examples. Hello? Hello? That's better. Right. So, can you hear? Is that all right? Sorry, I don't know how to make it louder. Anyway, that was an example of a wide, open, relaxed singing, at least as far as Lomax is concerned. And here's another example of tense and narrow singing. It's kind of simple, isn't it? Easy to distinguish. How about this one?
Traded my horse for an old yaller cow, and I went fiddle-lotty-fiddle-lay. She didn't give milk because she didn't know how.
Please listen.
Fiddle-lotty-fiddle-lay. Traded my cow for a little brindle case, and I went fiddle-lotty-fiddle-lay. Never made a trade, but I didn't lose haste, and I went fiddle-lotty-fiddle-lay.
Who thinks it is narrow? Narrow? Right. Who thinks it is wide? No one wide. Really?
It's between.
It's between, you think? Who thinks it is tense? Who thinks it relaxed? Okay. I think my experiment has failed. Well, what I wanted to show you with this particular example that there will always be situations where we don't agree. And there will be many such examples. And the reason for that is that tension, as Lomax calls it, or width, are actually perceptual criteria. So we can have different opinions about it. There is no right or wrong. And it makes it particularly difficult to annotate. So if we really kind of want to annotate a song in these terms, we have to put together quite a large perceptual experiment with a relatively large sample of participants, which have to be diversified in terms of their cultural background and musical experience. And this is really hard to do. This is not something I could do within my PhD for a large number of recordings. So anything but scalable. And we don't want to go that route. What else can we do? We could start asking other questions. For example, where exactly in the song was a tense? Or what exactly parts of the throat and mouth were wide open? And this brings us to singing physiology. For example, let me try if I can do it. Happy birthday to... So I can sing in different ways, yeah? Happy birthday to you, happy birthday to you, happy birthday, dear everyone. Or I can say, happy birthday, dear everyone. So it's different in terms of tension, isn't it? But what did I do to make it different? Can anybody tell me? No? I did something in the throat. Or in the mouth?
In the pressure.
In the pressure? Okay, we've got it all very nice. So we going back to the pictures. If I'll just... yeah, our vocal apparatus is quite a complex thing, and as you rightly mentioned, we have three components, and it's all an interplay of these three. We have an airstream coming from our lungs, going to the vocal folds and building an overpressure under the vocal folds, making them vibrate. And this vibration translates this air pressure into sound waves, which then go through all these cavities of very strange forms that you can see in the picture. So it's a bit strange. And is radiated from the lips, and this is what we hear is vocal sound of a particular timbre. And the problem with it is that all these tiny bits and pieces, they are all very flexible and they all move. We'll do another experiment. Try the following for me. Say the following. Can you try? Exactly. That's your vocal folds. Oh-oh. 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 Can you feel it? Can you locate it? No? Can you locate the feeling? Where is it? So it's behind your Adam's apple, basically. Yeah. So if you take two fingers and put them on the side of your Adam's apple, and then try to wobble your larynx a little bit to the side. It's just to demonstrate to you how flexible it is. It's not stable. It's all ligaments and cartilages, so it's all muscles. It's all moving. And this is why it makes it so complex. So there are lots of degrees of freedom. Despite that, physiology provides us with objective language to talk about what the singer is doing, as opposed, for example, to saying this is a brassy sound and this is a round sound or whatever, which can mean anything. So to me, it was a direction to go. And what I did first is I compiled a preliminary ontology of vocal production based on physiological processes. And I'll show you what it looks like at the moment. Computer allows. Don't try to read it, it's just to give you an impression of the complexity. So the above part is the actual ontology, and the lower part is the annotation. The ontology at the moment consists of 25 dimensions, which are represented on average by, say, 3 categories. So it's quite a lot of stuff, too much to work with, actually. One thing that I wanted to mention about that is that the actual annotation process of musical examples requires quite a detailed temporal analysis. And it's a trade-off between the granularity of the analysis and the amount of physiological information you can track, and also of the actual length of what you can listen to. Because when you do it through listening, you have to have some length. If it's very short, you can't actually, you don't hear anything. So it could be actually a subject for a separate talk. I'm not going to go into it now, but it's not trivial. The next thing I would like to do is to talk to specialists, people who understand vocal physiology very good. There is an area called voice science, which is a growing area at the moment, very exciting, but unfortunately they are not far enough to give us ready concepts to work with. So we could actually contribute to their knowledge if we wanted, if we continue with this kind of stuff. So I would have to go for specialists who practically understand the vocal physiology, say singing teachers and ENT specialists. And I'm going to interview some of them, ideally from various fields and cultures, to verify, for the one thing, to verify the ontology I produce, and also to better understand the relationship between the perceptual descriptors we were talking about and the physiology. And my approach is a mixed method approach, we call it, which consists of a quantitative part and a qualitative part. And you have seen the quantitative part and you're well familiar with this. It's this kind of stuff, basically. And the qualitative, the qualitative analysis or approach, at least in this case, is based on interviews. It could also be observations, in my case, interviews with a relatively small number of participants. In my case, probably 5 to 10. I'm lucky if I get 10. Asking open questions and basically listening to what they have to say, because they are experts and they have understanding of this stuff, which is not explicitly formalized. And then the interviews are transcribed and analyzed. On paper, it can look like this. In the computer software, it can look like this. So you basically extract keywords or assign keywords, key phrases for each paragraph. Then you group these key phrases and then you group them again and so on, and you arrive probably at some kind of network in the end and try to make sense of this huge bulk of information. And the main point is to reduce the information to something manageable. Yes, and that's basically the approach, so I'll summarize it. First thing, and probably most important, is the middle level of physiological processes that we introduce to analyze vocal timbre. The next point is granularity of your analysis. That is going to be very important as soon as you start actually annotating musical examples with physiological information. The experts, we need to talk to experts who understand the physiology, and we need to find the right experts, and qualitative plus quantitative approach to verify our knowledge. Yes, thank you very much. Questions, please.
Thank you very much, Polina. Questions, Sander?
I think it's the difficult step is that you have the problem that you have some parameters, let's say in the productive side of timbre, and you want to relate it to the perceptual thing somehow.
Yes.
So I would suggest maybe you get into contact with some experts in voice pathology, for example, because usually they have, I know some people who have the equipment to make, for example, these high-speed camera observations of the glottis and all these things, and to get some data sets where at least some of the physical parameters are known for some signals, and maybe just to see if people really perceive these differences on the productive side, in the perceptual side. Then, I mean, just to see if there's really a connection which is somehow really safe and always perceivable.
Yeah, there's the question about whether we get the same acoustic results and the same, as you say, perceptual results when we employ the same physiology. And that's a good question which I think isn't answered in general, but it's kind of practically answered. There is a whole direction in singing teaching which was introduced and founded by a singer called, her name was Jo Estill, and she also did some research in voice science. She published in journal Voice and so on, but was actually an active teacher and singer who introduced this language of physiology to the daily work of singing teachers, and they have been doing it for 2-3 decades now. So it kind of works. Nobody really looked into it in detail, but you can hear the physiology and you can teach people hearing it. Yeah. And this is what experienced singing teachers do every day, every moment. The problem is rather that not all of them use that language that we can kind of formalize and understand. But yes, you're absolutely right. Someone has to look into it. Another point maybe that you mentioned is using equipment to look into the vocal apparatus, which would be very nice to do. Absolutely, but in case of Cantometrics data set that I work with, it's all recordings, so we don't have the singers. So we have to go through listening in that case. But I absolutely agree. When we start actually to develop MIR tools, this is what I did, if you remember last year, this is what I did with phonation modes, breathy and pressed and so on, flow. You first have to go by a real singer where you can actually look into his throat and see what he's doing.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Hello. I have another question more about the beginning of your presentation with the statement of women that sing more nasal would live in more oppressed cultures. And I was wondering, culture is changing always, and I think within a span of 50 or 100 years, it has evolved, and we see that it can go very fast. Is there then also a change in the older recordings, of the more recent recordings of female singing of certain cultures, or are they just not available?
This is my favorite question to ask, and I don't think anybody knows, because the Cantometrics thing was the biggest comparative project in music, and it remains it to date. There is nothing, no one has done anything of a similar scope as Lomax did, and he wasn't at that point interested in the change. He was more interested in the static state, probably because he just didn't have the means to track it all. So you need data sets which can track time. So if we would have recordings, we could study them as you did with your method. But well, I think that's the bottleneck. If we have recordings which have nice metadata on time, and we can compare them, that would be a great work to do. And this is actually what we would like to know. You're absolutely right.
Mm-hmm. But I don't know the archives worldwide, if there are small collections in Berlin or somewhere that could
Nobody knows. Nobody knows. You can have particular collections which track time. You have even particular researchers, for example, who would go on field recordings for 25 years to the same area. And then they have kind of time span that you can work with, but it's rare. Mm. And to bring different collections together from different institutions to find out actually what do we know about time change. How do we do it?
Thank you. Maybe one final question.
Thank you for the talk. Can you elaborate a little bit more on the ontology that you're using? For example, what are the key concepts with ontology? And if you have used it already for some inference or something like that?
I haven't. It's very new. It's all completely work in progress. But well, if we just look at the titles here. So we have the physical qualities of subglottal pressure and transglottal airflow, which then defines the phonation modes I talked about last year. This is the first. These are the first 2 dimensions, and then we talk about things like mode of vocal folds vibration. They can vibrate in a thick fold mode when the whole body of them vibrates. They can vibrate in thin fold mode where just the edges vibrate. Constriction, position of the larynx compared to the, well, actually position of the larynx depends on pitch. So with pitch, the larynx is raised. But we can compare the position of the larynx in particular singing with position of the larynx for speech on this pitch, which is a bit speculative as well, because you wouldn't speak very high usually, but you would sing very high. And still, for the singers, this kind of makes sense. This tells you whether, probably if you ask a singing teacher what is narrow singing, he would be thinking about this, he or she, they. What else have we got? I can't see it really well. Yeah, position of the larynx, and we have the thyroid cartilage. This is the same here, the Adam's apple. And when you sing nicely, you sing oh, ah, ah, you tilt it a little bit. When you sing in speech mode, ah, you don't. So that's one of the differences. And there is also a cricoid cartilage. Like here, this thing there. It's a bit hard to show, which also plays a role in the speech mode singing. And then another important thing, this IES means epiglottic sphincter, the muscle around the epiglottis, which is very important for creating this kind of brassy sound. So if you sing something like ah, that's this thing getting narrow. So somewhere there, at the back of the mouth, you narrow the space. And it can be nasal or oral, both. Jaw position, and so these are the main physiological traits I have taken. And then what I also look at is I call it part of individual range. It's basically about whether the singer is coming close to his break or not. So when you come close to the break, for most singers, I actually thought you will always sound tense. I had to find out with Lomex's examples, that's not true. So I really learned something in the process already. Is it the kind of information you were interested in? Am I actually answering your question, or?
Okay, I can ask you after the session.
Okay.
Don't want to take up the time.
It could be really, if you go into detail there, it will be a different talk, I'm afraid.
Okay, great. Let's thank Polina again.